we're delighted that Caspar Sonnen is here of IDFA, where he runs the lab. And IDFA, of course, is the place where all the documentaries are shown, but also where a lot of interactive projects are commissioned, shown, shared, and observed. Now, let's see here. Caspar is of the IDFA DocLab, recently won, I'm just going to say it, the EU Doc Network Award for his work in that field, because he's a tireless investigator and promoter of the new thing. So, Caspar, tell us all about it.
Am I using this one? Yeah. Hi there. First of all, I'm very much into radio and the old thing, and I just want to say to the one person from radio here, most of the classic interactive documentaries and the best projects that are out there are actually started by radio makers or have radio people involved. So just for the record, I'm not all about the new things. Let's see if I can get this clicker to, yes. So what was it, in 2007, we started a program at IDFA called IDFA DocLab, trying to see if we could do more with nonfiction as an art form than just use the internet to put existing movies out there, but actually see what type of new types of nonfiction art we were seeing and we could showcase that were actually coming out of the digital revolution. And I mean, a lot has been said about the past already, but in short, I guess this was sort of 5 to 10 years ago, this was the situation that we had. Ietsje verder? Is this better? Yeah? Okay. So I guess chaos everywhere. Nobody knew how to call this, how to frame this, what type of words we had to use, who were doing it. And even though I think we still don't really have a definition, and maybe interactive documentary is mostly defined by what it's not, we do see that interactive documentaries are growing up. And I'm sorry, masterclass people, cats are still pretty important on the internet. But that's a sidestep. Because if we look around the world and we see who's involved in interactive documentary, we see Sundance, Tribeca. I mean, there's a huge festival circuit right now for interactive documentary. There are funds for interactive documentary. All of the major publishers and documentary organizations are moving into this space. And even though the interactive documentary genre still lacks like a real proper infrastructure that, for instance, the television documentary has. And we still have issues with diversity. There is still very little critical reflection taking place because it's all still very young and new, and we all love to hug each other because, you know, it's so hard to do this. But it's starting to happen. The other side, of course, is that as the internet has grown up and as the internet has sort of invaded itself into every aspect of our life, we're also starting to see the dark sides of technology much more explicitly. And all of these things are actually great topics for interactive documentary. And as a result, I mean, we can say that interactive documentary has brought a unique new voice to our perception of the world. And just to tease you, for the people who don't know any of the pictures that are coming up, these are just a couple of the classic interactive documentary projects that we've seen over the last couple of years. These are projects that won awards at IDFA DocLab all over the world. And just to say, if I went too fast, this is where you can find these projects. You can go to the IDFA DocLab website where like 150 interactive documentaries can be found. Or you can go to Williams Docubase at MIT, where you can actually read about case studies about some of these projects. And I do urge you, like if you're interested in this field and if you came here because you wanted to explore digital storytelling, the Docubase is one of the places where you can really dive deep into what this field is all about. That said, because we're not here to talk about the traditional interactive documentary, if that's even a term that we can use, Because at this time, as the internet has been growing up, at the same time, as Monique just said, on the hardware front, we're sort of entering a new era of technological breakthroughs. And again, this means chaos everywhere. It's the Wild West of investors, Hollywood, Silicon Valley. They're all jumping on top of each other to work with these new technologies, the same as the artists. So we see amazing projects coming out. This was one that we commissioned a robot artist from MIT to discover whether robots can actually tell documentary stories or not. The reveal is yes, they can. But robots and artificial intelligence is one of the fields that is really interesting to see what kind of stories and artworks are coming out of there right now. Same goes for biometric data and neuroscientific technologies. Or even sort of the blending, the blurring lines between the digital reality and the physical reality. Physical and offline sensory experiences through wearable technology, etc. It's really interesting to see what's happening out there. And I guess in this whole era of technological breakthrough, the big elephant in the room is virtual reality. I'm not sure, who of you has seen this picture? I think every virtual reality presentation over the last 2 years has used this picture, or every news article about it has used this picture. And I remember yesterday, William and me were talking about when cinema was invented and it was marketed through the idea of people hiding under their seat because they were afraid that a train was coming out of the screen. VR is marketed for that very same roller coaster thrill ride effect. That's how we know it. Those are actually some of the best experiences that are now out there on VR. On the left there you can see Birdly, which is, I guess, my favorite virtual reality thrill ride out there. It was shown at Syndicate last year, developed by a university in Zurich, and it's now it was part of the Google showcase at South by. It's all over the place. It's all over the world. It was at Sundance, and it really gives you the unique experience of feeling what it is to fly like a bird. You're weightless. Wherever this thing is, whatever event it is, you have to stand in line for probably 2 to 3 hours to get 3 minutes of airtime. I've done it twice. It's worth it. But I guess I'm from IDFA, I'm from the documentary community, and in a sense, one of the questions for us is what happens with virtual reality beyond sort of the roller coaster experience? And I guess one of the real interesting things that virtual reality gives us more than any other medium is the experience of presence. And to maybe just give one example of I think, the most important people who are working specifically on the experience of presence. It's Felix and Paul. They're a duo from Montreal. 2 young guys working in 3D and 360 cinema. You can actually see the Project Strangers with Patrick Watson at the VR meetup later today, or later tonight. And it's one of those projects that shows you the power of a 360 cinematic image. Where the first thing you kind of feel is like, okay, so what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Which button do I push? Where's the plot twist going to be? And what they do in their work and in the experiences that they make is they actually sort of unstorify their experiences. It's very just about being in a place and trying to slow down, trying to just, as William said, wander in a space, not wait for the big narrative to hit you, but just be there. In the case of Strangers, you're just there with a singer-songwriter in his studio as he performs a song. The first time I saw it, I was like, okay, that's a great tech demo. That's the best version of 3D video that I've ever seen. And it took me 3 weeks to realize when someone asked me, like, do you know Patrick Watson? I was like, do I know Patrick Watson? Yes, of course. And I was almost about to say, like, I visited his studio and like realized that my brain had sort of processed this in a different way than I would if it was a movie. The other, of course, important field of interest for virtual reality, especially for photojournalists and documentary storytellers, is immersive journalism. It's a new field that's heavily being explored right now. I guess one of the pioneers of this is Dan Fung Dennis, who sort of went from photography from like a young war photographer to making films. And from there, he still felt like he couldn't convey the experience of being on the battleground good enough. And he went deeper and started Condition 1, which was pre-VR. You could just like move your iPad around to move within a 360 image or a 180 image. He's now made 0 Point, one of the first VR films that was released. And here's a more recent piece that's part of Chris Milk's Verse project. He made it together with Vice News and Spike Jonze. And it was just a very simple report of a demonstration in New York where they just took a 360 camera, went outside together with a reporter from Vice. And on the left, you can see the reporter from Vice. And actually, if you look on the right of the screen, the guy in the red coat that's kind of partly blocked by the cameraman who's holding the 360 camera. That's all the same 360 shot. So if you would look around inside that image, you could choose whether you'd watch the reporter interview someone or whether you look behind and you see the director discussing with the cameraman, where should we go next? Like, are we going around the corner? Because maybe that's where it's more interesting. So you get this sort of hyper-transparency happening in a documentary image that we don't usually see the director actually making the shot. And this is a really interesting sort of very basic thing of doing VR video is like, where do you leave the crew? They're behind the camera usually. Well, there is no behind the camera in a 360 image. So do you put the camera there and just leave the space and see what happened when you get back? Or do you acknowledge yourself and be in the space? Like, those are totally interesting questions that artists are now struggling with and finding creative uses for. But if we're talking about immersive journalism and if we're talking about VR, I think it's important, or it's impossible to do that without mentioning Nani de la Peña. Nani de la Peña was doing immersive journalism years ago, way before Oculus Rift actually was invented or hit the market. And if you don't know Nani, and just to one signal, Palmer Luckey, the boy who invented the Oculus Rift and sort of single-handedly was responsible for the rise of VR in the last couple of years. He was a student of Nani. He actually developed Oculus in part working for Nani. And what Nani does is she does virtual recreations of existing news events. And I'll show you a little clip, which was based on an actual video of a girl in Syria that was singing a song when a bomb struck or a rocket exploded in that place. And so what she does, because she feels when we see news footage like that, we don't connect with it enough, she uses VR to try to really, well, basically immerse us in that moment. And so you get a really sort of emotional experience. This video doesn't do it justice, but just to give you an idea, every movement that you see from the camera is basically the viewer moving their head. So here you go.
A third of all Syrians have been displaced by the war. Reports indicate children have been specifically targeted in the violence. There are now over 1 million refugee children. Food supplies are severely strained, and the number of refugees has been growing exponentially.
And it's hard to show pieces like projects like this on a flat 2D screen because it's very hard to. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but you have to experience it to really feel what the medium of VR can do. But the work of Nani is I mean, it's very in your face, and you're actually, as you could see maybe in the picture before, in the middle picture, that's how you experience it. So you walk through a virtual or through a physical space. So when the bomb hits and everywhere there's smoke, you're actually walking around through that smoke, trying to find your place. And a lot of discussions are going on right now about what is the meaning of experiences like this? How close do we go into sort of recreating and almost traumatizing the people who are experiencing this? What are the ethics involved? How does this create empathy or not? Those are really interesting discussions to be held. And I think it's important to try and experience those projects as much as you can to be an informed participant to that debate. I guess another really interesting focus of what's happening in VR is interactive storytelling. A lot of the VR experiences are actually not that interactive, besides the fact that you can move your head around or that you can walk inside a specific space. It's pretty difficult, and the language of how to tell a story in VR is still very much in development. And I think, for me, one of the people that inspired me the most over the last couple of years in terms of trying to find ways to tell a story and take someone almost like the guided bus tour, I would say, through a story and still have that quality of wandering around within the image is Oscar Raby. He's a performance artist from Chile originally. And it actually shows that a lot of the, I would say like a lot of the innovations in interactive documentary on the web came from radio and photography. A lot of the real innovations of VR are coming from performance art and theater people, because they know how to work with a space. They know how to make someone look behind them. A filmmaker doesn't know how to make someone look behind them, because they would cut away to a shot behind them, to a different camera viewpoint. And I'll just show you a short clip of Ascent, which is, I guess, the breakthrough project of Oscar. On the right screen.
Hi Dad. I'm glad you could see this. I thought the instructions might have been a bit confusing, but here you are, so I guess it worked. I wanted to send you something real, and oddly enough, look what I came up with. Look around. If you stare at certain things for long enough, something happens. We're looking back to 1973. Right on this spot, you have just been notified of a court-martial taking place up the hill. But today, I want you to take the time you didn't take back then, and stay with me for a little longer.
So this is a very short teaser of a 15-minute experience in which you step inside the shoes of Oscar's father, who, as a young soldier, was witness to a mass execution of the military dictatorship in Chile. And the experience will be downloadable publicly in, I guess, a couple of weeks. So keep your eyes open for that. We'll definitely announce that when it happens, so you can watch it for yourself at home. And it's a really interesting piece where you sort of have that tension between being guided through the story and at the same time being free to wander around inside one of the different scenes that you progressively go through as you get closer to the site where the killings happened. And it's. I mean, I've seen a lot of people come out of this experience crying. I mean, it's. The reason why I think that says something, because it's really difficult when you do technologically innovative stuff to still really move people and really create emotional experiences. It's like we developed cinema for, like, it took us 100 years to develop that to where it is right now. And cinema is pretty damn good at making you feel something or grasping you and pulling you into a story. When a story is interactive, that's a totally different ballgame, and it's really hard to do that. And it's not just taking a very sort of emotionally strong subject or subject matter. It's very much in how the story is told. Another really interesting thing that's happening with VR is when VR is not just something you sit and you, through putting the goggles on, you go to a different, you transport yourself to a different virtual space. But actually when you use VR and you use live camera feeds and a lot of weird technology to actually change what you see within the space that you are already. And a lot of the things is sort of stepping inside someone else's shoes, actually make that a literal experience. And that's what Be Another Lab does. And I'll just show you a short clip in which they explain what they do.
The Machine to Be Another combines neuroscience protocols with art performances to trick the brain's perception of one's own body. Instead of seeing themselves in the body of a digital avatar, like in most of the neuroscience studies, the machine allows users to see themselves in the body of a real person. The protocol of interaction combines visual, audio, physical, and motor stimuli. The system is coded in Arduino, Pure Data, and Open Frameworks, and uses a low-budget hardware composed by video games head-mounted displays, first-person stereo cameras, Arduino, and servo engines. During art residencies, exhibitions, performances, and academic congresses of anthropology and embodied interaction, we developed several applications of the Machine to Be Another, addressing issues like mutual respect, gender identity, generational conflicts, immigration and physical disability bias, body extension, and neurorehabilitation. More than an art installation, the Machine to Be Another is a Creative Commons initiative that can be replicated by anyone interested in understanding the world through the eyes of the other, and therefore interested in understanding themselves.
Beyond the roller coaster. It's a pretty rough little clip that they made. It's not a very well produced video, but it kind of gives you a taste of what they do. We had them at IDFA last year as an installation in which they actually ask people to tell their own story and then have someone else sit opposite. So that's what you see happening on that screen right there. And you really hear someone tell their story while you are actually in their body virtually. It's really unique experiences, and it's for 10 days they run the installation, and it's one of the rare examples where the artists who have to manage and stand beside their installation for 10 days, for hours and hours on end, like on the 10th day, they're still sort of like on ecstasy of happiness of all the experiences that they just get to witness between people. Father and son swapping bodies and experiencing like what it is through to move through someone else's body. Again, very hard to explain. If you get a chance to experience The Machine to Be Another, do try it out. And I guess in terms of all these projects, they're so totally different in terms of the technologies that they use, the experiences that they provide, that it's very early days in terms of like how does this type of work get distributed. And there is, as I said, like Oscar Raby and Dan Fong Dennis, they are trying out the Steam gaming platform, which is used normally to sell video games to video gamers. So it's that platform really technologically is very well suited to sell VR experiences through, but it's not where the documentary audience is. So those are really interesting challenges. I guess one of the more successful and high-profile examples is Chris Milk's Verse. Chris Milk and Aaron Coblin, longtime innovators of interactive storytelling and interactive experiences, are moving almost completely into virtual reality, and they're doing partnerships with New York Times, Vice, a lot of the sort of the main players, and they've developed the Verse app. And it's actually one of the few apps that you can download, and you have your little Google Cardboard or your Gear VR. And once in a while, they release a new project. On the right side, you could see it's the latest project that they released from JR. Yeah, okay. So I'll have to move on a bit quicker and say tools and resources. Go to the VR meetup after this, because there is a lot of resources and people providing tools and platforms for you to actually dive into this for yourself. We're developing something with Oscar Raby that we're going to announce later this November. It's becoming easier and easier to actually produce this stuff yourself, even if you have no experience. And finally, I just want to end it with one of the more high-profile interactive documentary installation pieces that's being created right now by Karim Ben Khelifa. For the photographers in the room, he's one of the bigger war photographers that we know. And he's moved into virtual reality a couple of years ago, and I'll just show you a short clip in which he explains the project himself.
This project was born out of frustration as a photojournalist. I have covered conflicts for the last 15 years, and I knew I could not just do the same when I became a father. Yet, I was not done with trying to understand wars. My friend in Israel, when they know I'm heading for Gaza, cannot help themselves but to wish me luck and to stay safe. They believe a lot of people in Gaza are irrational. But also when I spend weeks in Gaza working and I'm about to return to Israel, my Palestinian friends are telling me exactly the same. Just be careful there. So there is a bigger story than the war itself, and perhaps this is the one I need to explore and share. This project is rooted in my experience going from one side to the other in many different wars and conflicts, finding that people's dreams, hopes, and nightmares are often more similar than they are different. Who's your enemy? For the audience to understand and feel that, we will use artificial intelligence, cognitive science, and the latest technologies in virtual realities.
המשפחה שלי, בעם שלי, בנשק, בדרכים אחרות שיכולות לפגוע בנפש. אם זה
Here is the concept. The Oculus Rift is a virtual reality headset. It blocks your vision and places you in a virtual world that we are creating. Fox Harrell, a professor, and Emile Bruno, a researcher, both from the MIT, will provide the analytical backbone. When the audience walks in between enemies, we will measure bias and how they physiologically respond to the installation. And in using neuroscience research, we could be able to discover how much empathy has been created. I am planning to bring the fighters of 7 other long-standing conflicts together in the very same way. You create an enemy as a kid without having met your enemy, because the society around you has created an enemy in the other. So the question is, could I be you if I was on the other side?
So, yeah, sure. Because I think it's interesting to know what it's like to make a project like this. But I'm not a maker. I'm in the very luxury position of like selecting what I like and showing it. I hope we have a Skype connection with Karim. Hopefully. Yay! There is Karim, everybody. And Karim, you just got off a plane an hour or two ago, I think. Can you hear us?
A little bit more. I'm still jet lagged.
Great. I think everybody in the audience is a little bit jet lagged from the last couple of days of the conference. I basically have one question. You started out as a photographer, and I got to know you as a person walking around with an idea for what I think was 2 years ago the most ambitious VR project that I'd come around. I just have seen the first prototype released that you showed at Tribeca in New York. At what stage is the project, and can you tell us a little bit about what it's like as a photographer to do a VR project like this?
Well, I'm not a technologist. I realized the story was more important than the medium. So it was in that sense very easy for me to move out of photography. And I had a chance to be invited at the Open Documentary Lab, and hello, William, where it was really helpful to just look around, see science, see new technologies, but not as a way for me to learn how to do that, but to see what they could offer. And I had this project, it was a photo project, it's called Portrait of the Enemies, where I basically do the same, and there were photos on the wall, opposing side, and the enemies would look at each other, it would be augmented by sounds, but it was still a photo project. And it seems very, very obvious when I discover virtual reality that what would happen if instead of photograph of a portrait of a fighter looking at each other on the wall, what would happen if the guy is in the room? What would happen if he looks at you? What would happen if he talks to you? If you see him breathe, what would happen if you see his body language? Well, I think what would happen is you would end up in my shoes meeting someone. And as I said, in conflicts, I meet human beings on both sides. It's sometimes hard to hear it from one side, but that's the fact. And my colleagues, photojournalists covering wars, would see that, because otherwise we would be on monster on one side and killers, and it couldn't work. But we always meet human, and so since they don't see that to each other, that's the story I want to do. And
by the way, if there's anybody in the audience that has a question for Karim, just raise your hand. What would you say has been the biggest challenge for you in the last? How long have you been working on this project now?
I discovered virtual reality in September 2013. So in next September, that will be about 2 years. The biggest challenge, there's zillions of challenges with this. I think the biggest challenge is to don't think you're crazy, and to make sure that the people around you, that you surround yourself by people who know things you don't know, especially when you're not a technologist, and to make sure that you have a reality check with what the technology can do, what it can offer, and can you get there? Because ultimately you take, and especially with this project, I take a lot of people on board. But being at the MIT was one of the things where I could directly confront my questions and say, "Am I crazy?" And people would say, "No, you can do it. So you can do that. Yes, you can do that." Often they would tell me, "It's pretty expensive, but you can do that." And at that point, I was broke and I had no budget to do anything, so I might as well think big. And the money wasn't an issue at the start because we had.
I think the audio. Are we still there? Do we still have the audio?
Yeah.
Yet? Yeah. Cool. So in the whole process, what is like can you say like what is the biggest sort of disappointment or mistake that you made, and what is the biggest sort of, I don't know, discovery or happy accident that you had? Because you tried a lot of different versions and concepts and ideas until the point where you are now.
I think the hardest thing, and even for someone, I mean, I haven't done virtual reality, and I've never done, except trying virtual reality 4 minutes at the MIT. I've never, Oscar Rabi, I haven't tried any of those experiences. Because what I do is ultimately out there in the real life. And so this is my inspiration. This is how people interact with each other. The cognitive science, the artificial intelligence, which is not so much out there visually, but that we're using every day. So in all of this, I'm getting, the challenges and the answers of those challenges too. And it's so much, I think one of the things that is a very big challenge is to believe that you can kind of get inspired so much by the real life that you can actually bring it back to a virtual environment and keep this within journalism, keep this within the ethics as we know them, keep this in a way that the very same project was published on a paper and now it's in VR. So it didn't really existed before. But I had the validation of a lot of really serious journalists who went through that and say, yeah, this is journalism. I mean, it's radically different, but this is journalism.
I think, I think we're running a little bit out of time, but maybe one last thing. If for a photographer or a filmmaker in the room who sees something in VR or has a story to tell or has an idea, like what would be your single best tip, single best advice, like how to get started?
Think about two things. Think about theater, even if you're nonfiction, even if you do journalism, as I do, think space. Because VR is, you're not looking at a medium, you are in the medium. And lately we've heard we were the medium. We can publish, we can spread out our news, we can do all of this. But with VR, you are in the medium. I mean, it's Tron, really, literally. It's Tron like 25 years ago with a better quality. And so thinking space is probably what the shortcut to the answers that you can have with your story. How do you tell a story when you don't have the attention, when you don't master the attention? With a photograph, I master the attention. I mean, as long as they want to look at my photograph, when they're looking at it, I know what they're looking at and I can compose. But when it's all over you, when it's behind you, when it's above you, you need to think space and theater and ways of storytelling, and not filmmaking and not photography. You really need to go into another dimension for that. And the two closest one that I know are theater and the real life that we got out there.
Okay, thank you very much for those wise words, Karim. And I'll leave you to your physical space in Berlin.
Yes.
And we will go back to our physical space in Amsterdam.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
And I'm out of time, so I just want to close it off with one of my favorite quotes that has been applicable to new media storytelling as long as I know, and it's still applicable. We speak a new and powerful language capable of saying things no other language can say. But few have realized this, and even fewer have found what to say. So there's a huge room for opportunity there. Thank you a lot. And if you're looking for financing of your project, or you have a great project that you want to show, or you want to further your skills further, get in touch and find us. The festival is in November. Deadline for applications is August 1. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you.